Islander American Studies and the Department of Screen Arts and Cultures at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Professor Nakamura, her fields of study include digital media theory, digital game studies, ethnic studies, feminist theory, film and television studies, science and technology, and race and gender, of course, in new media. Among her books are Race in Cyberspace, Digitizing Race, Visual Cultures of the Internet, and most recently an edited volume with Peter Cho White of Race After the Internet. I first came to know Lisa Nakamura by crossing paths in our shared interest in the study of digital games. And I did want to just take a moment to kind of express the appreciation of those of us in that area for Lisa's foray into that field. We were just chatting briefly before this event started about how difficult it sometimes can be in the study of digital games to, even in our classrooms, even when dealing with students and trying to cover material on games, getting them to think critically about things like the construction of race and gender in games and online environments. And her work has really been particularly important for that. I think of pieces like Don't Hate the Player, Hate the Game, et cetera, in this area. It may not be the heart of what she does. She said she dabbles in it to me, but to read her work is not to read someone who looks like they're dabbling in anything. And for those of us who work on digital games, and especially for those like me interested in how the techniques of digital game design are increasingly used by institutions in various ways to cultivate creativity, extract labor, and shape subjectivities, Professor Nakamura's work has been utterly central to that. So without further delay, let me introduce Professor Nakamura, and she will be speaking today on the following title: I Will Do Everything That I Am Asked, Spam Baiting, Dog Shaming, and the Racial Violence of Social Media.
Okay, so while my presentation is getting queued up, I'm going to apologize for standing here rigidly, but there's a video, otherwise I'd walk around and be more interesting to look at. So I want to start by thanking the organizers of this conference. I've been waiting 10 years for this conference. It seems to me that other conferences don't want to go there, go where this conference is going to go. Also, Richard and Tom's work has been extremely formative. I teach it all the time. Remediation, absolutely the first thing you could respectably assign in a class. And call it serious. And Tom's work on economies and video games has been central. And I want to give a shout out to the center. The Center for 21st Century Studies was doing interdisciplinarity before anybody wanted to monetize that as a label. And they were doing it well. I think it was really a beacon for people working when I was in the 80s and the 90s, when the canon problem seemed so intractable, right? And the kind of culture wars were so hard to deal with. The center was always doing really rigorous, very adventuresome work early on. I wish I'd gone to grad school at the center, but it was not to be. So I also want to thank Mary Mullen because she got me an Ethernet adapter, which I really, really needed. So I was able to get my grades in yesterday. So, so here's the title of my talk. 2013 is the year that the internet reached peak hate, according to Esquire magazine of this month. As Stephen March writes, quote, "The internet has reached peak hate. It had to. At every other moment in history when there has been an explosion of text, whether through social change, like the birth of a religious movement, or technological change, like the advent of print, a period of nasty struggle ensued before the forces of civility reined it in. At this point, the digital is nothing but dark side," says March, though he posits that it will be civilized in the end. And it's interesting to me, he doesn't mention racism or sexism at all. It's just about the problems of middle-class white social media users, basically. But that is his target, social media. What makes media social, or rather what makes social media social? Here's the answer to that question. If you haven't seen this before, this is the famous manta ray photobomb picture, which I think started either on 4chan or Reddit and then just spread all over the place. I think I saw it in 4 different places. So this is a really good example of what makes social media social. Well, there's been a lot of trenchant post-Marxist critique lately by Geert Loving, Terranova, Jody Dean, and so on, that fundamentally believes that social media is not a form of laborless labor, but rather is labor that should be compensated, meaning people who make things like this should get something back. there is definitely agreement across all camps about what has value. We can't agree about who should get paid, YouTube or us, but we know what has value, what spreads virally, what defines the social, and it's things like this, right? Pictures and video. And this has always been so from well before the social web. Images have been the common currency of the internet since well before 1995. So the palace is a good example of how the visual started to come in more, but even before then, this was true. Anthropologist Don Slater, in his study of IRC in 1998, found that the most highly valued and actively traded content was not software, not games, it was sex pics. Erotic photographs of individuals who met online. Either they were of themselves or of other people, but in his article, Trading Sex Pics, he talks about how these were used as commercial kinds of, currency to anchor virtual identities and virtual bodies, but also to help people make their own archives or collections of unusual or rare and thus valuable and tradable digital images on people's computers. So even before Facebook or Flickr, this was happening. And humorous, erotic, and shocking images have always had the most value in what we have today, the social networks and image boards that have stand alongside IRC. IRC is still around, it's still used, but it's not as popular as it was. So 4chan, Reddit, Imager, and PhotoBucket are among the most popular sites on the internet. As Monroy Hernandez, who wrote an article on 4chan, puts it, there are meme factories. Oh, and by the way, this article, this paper I'm giving now is going to be an essay in an issue of the Journal of Visual Culture, which is doing a special issue on memes. So I thought I'd talk about the dark side of memes. So these are sites, Imager, Reddit, 4chan, where users send, rank, and most importantly, recirculate noteworthy and valuable images as a seedbed of embedded culture. And as I said, no one really pays for these images, except for with more images, with more rare and more unusual images. So when Monroy Hernandez studied 4chan, 4chan is a board that doesn't keep archives. It's anonymous and everything disappears as it rises to the top, it goes away. People preserve folders on their desktops for future enjoyment and remixing. He observed a transaction where one user wanted to, quote, shock a friend and offered to donate a picture of a cat in return. So cats are valuable currency on the internet. The traffic in internet images, rare, surprising, funny, has been celebrated as spreadable media by Henry Jenkins, and they really are the engine that makes social media run. No one says thanks for the update, they say thank you for the pics on Facebook, right? No one can really say what makes an imaging practice, dance, or song go viral. Usually these are unintentional. I don't think you could really plan that very well. Things like Gangnam Style, who knew? But really prized images are spectacular. They provide visual evidence of the impossible, the baffling, and the rare. And this reminds me of the 23rd law of the internet. According to 4chan, pics or it didn't happen. And in the cases I'll discuss in this paper are not just impossible, baffling, and rare, but also the racially abject, which is indeed the dark side of the digital. Abject images of racialized others were viral long before the internet. Indeed, audiences in the early 20th century attended dime museums where they observed professional savages. People from Queensland, here shown with R.A. Cunningham, who, as Rosalind Poignant documented in her book Professional Savages, displayed them at the Barnum Museum and in traveling shows, and in exhibitions like this one, as well as at the World's Fair. So this was how people were traveling before the internet, right? Consuming these exotic others, circulating the pictures for future enjoyment by buying postcards or collecting posters or other artifacts. Here's another picture of the impossible, the baffling, and the rare. As Poignant notes, the early 20th century was as anxious, if not more so, about rapid technological progress as ours is. They were worried about the dark side too. And the images and performances of race spread as part of a tactical cultural management about this fear of progress that was too rapid. The savage from darker nations is itself a meme, as is racism. In this paper, I'm going to make a controversial claim in response to Henry Jenkins' oft-quoted phrase, if it doesn't spread, it's dead. His new book is called Spreadable Media. There are some memes that should die, and the ones I'm going to discuss are among them. But just like no one knows how to make a meme go viral, it's not really clear how to kill viral media either. So Johannes' story about worrying about the send button. That could happen. What could you do about it? I'm going to be talking about this in reference to people who have no control over the spread of their image and in fact are made to produce abject images. So I'm going to start by talking about one of the cuter and more appealing memes to appear in recent years, and I'm going to be talking about the trope of shaming. So you might have noticed on the internet is all this stuff about shaming. Slut shaming, body shaming, exercise shaming, every kind of shaming. I'm going to talk about this visually. I'm going to be talking about it in terms of its spread. So here's one from dog shaming. This is one of the more appealing ones that's gone around recently, and it has this kind of pillory image of somebody committed a crime with a sign around their neck, which was part of the medieval kind of way of punishing people by making them testify to their crime and standing outside and being stoned or whatever. But as you can tell, this dog isn't ashamed at all. Here's another one. So these are all user-generated. People make them themselves. If you can't poop in mom's office right before her clients come over, I'm not sorry. Here's another dog shaming. And here's what dog shaving looked like in terms of its social media uptake. It really took off on Christmas of 2012, and it dropped off somewhat sharply after that. But you had things spun off from that, such as cat shaming, which seems an impossibility if you have a cat. I think this cat, this was taken in, I think this person was fostering this cat. That's my thinking about it. It's not as big as dog shaming. And then you had English grad student shaming. You can't read this, I don't think, but it says, I still don't really know what hermeneutical and dialectical mean. And so these are all made by grad students hiding their identity somewhat because there is some shame, right? There's some accountability, but also testifying to, their hidden crime, right? The confession, which is the mode of shaming in some ways. It's to shame yourself before someone else can do it, or to put yourself out there in public to be ashamed. And here's another one which I really liked. What is a trope, more seriously? And what I'm talking about today are tropes, right? So the trope of the picture, the confession, the printed text accompanying this, went somewhat darker places in 2012. This is part of what's called the child shaming meme. It's just one example. It's posted by Rashonda Billingsley. She was the mother of this child. The contrast in this is really bad, but what it says is that she posted photos of herself holding liquor, and she's not ready for social media, and so what her mother made her hold up is a sign saying, I'm being punished. If you want to know why, talk to my mother, and she made the daughter post this to her own Facebook profile, and then she prohibited her from using Facebook, effectively shaming her in front of all of her friends on Facebook. So this was a very divided kind of thing to do. It was in the Huffington Post. No one objected to dog shaming and cat shaming, but obviously this was very disturbing. Some people really approved of it. They said, what a great idea, right? Children are living their lives online. There's no way to punish or discipline children unless you go to where they are. Other people were totally horrified. This is the same way she cut off the top of the face so you can't really see the identity of this person. If you're not on the network, you might not know who they are. But you can see this girl's crying. So she is indeed ashamed, right? This is definitely an abject photograph right here. So I'm going to be making a leap somewhat from 2012, which is when this broke, to 2008, 2006. This was when internet users dubbing themselves scam baiters used this meme well ahead of time, making people pose with a sign to shame them. Many of them Nigerian would-be criminals, meaning people who would approach strangers on the internet seeking to defraud them in 419 advanced fee fraud scams. So according to Wikipedia, which is pretty good at this, scam baiters are internet vigilantes who pose as a potential victim to the scammer in order to waste their time and resources, gather information that will be of use to authorities, and publicly expose the scammer. So the punishments are done out of a sense of civic duty. And here's a good example of a photograph of what a scam baiter will make, or will rather request a would-be scammer to do, is to make a trophy image of themselves. This one says King of Retards. It's kind of hard to see because of the contrast. Here's another one that somebody was asked to make by a Western or English, usually, scam baiter, who justified these kinds of activities as a sense of civic duty as a form of amusement, or both. Scam baiters identify themselves as protected vigilantes who keep the internet safe by tormenting and wasting the time and resources of people who approach them on the internet, or sometimes they approach them, who would possibly do internet scams, and they say they're having fun at the same time. So here's another one, which is a little less sinister. It's like, it just says, I can't believe it's not butter, right? So where do these images come from? There are hundreds and hundreds of these on the internet. This one came, I totally can't see it. It says trophy room. So I think all of my slides are going to look really bad because they're calibrated in the first one, which is too bad because they're really good slides, but you just have to kind of imagine that it says trophy room. So there are 48,000 registered members on 419eater.com. There are hundreds of photographs, videos, and sound files in this room. The vast majority are photographic self-portraits like these. 419 is a designation of the Nigerian criminal code referring to fraud, and the adopted name for that genre is spam abroad, according to Finn Brunton's useful definition. He has a book out in spam this year. As the site states, baiting or tricking these spammers into performing ridiculous acts and demanding the photos as proof is both appropriate punishment, according to the vigilantes, and good fun or sport. Graham Parker, who wrote a book called Fair Use, talks about this sport as well. And he explains how it works. He says, the vast majority of spam is generated automatically. So the spam baiter starts out by claiming he is, quote, chiefly troubled by the idea he might be talking to a machine. He wants to go up to the chain of command. He wants to know he's speaking to a person. So he proposes a Turing test. The American has sent the Nigerian an email asking him to photographically recreate an attached image or a painting as confirmation that a human is reading and processing his communication. So Parker's book has some pictures of African people who have been approached by scam baiters and are reenacting a portrait, like a tableau, but I'm not going to show that. So there's lots of ways that these trophies are collected. 419 Eater doesn't do that. It doesn't ask scammers to reproduce pictures. There's specific tableau, but to make shaming images and videos and send them as proof of liveness. So this is what 419 Eater looks like. If you could see the color better. It has different rooms, so you can see the trophy room. The FAQ, which will give you information on how to actually make letters that will lure scammers into doing what you want, like pouring milk over their heads or posing with bras on, or posing naked and sending you pictures, or even getting tattoos. And there's a bunch of tips here. There used to be a mentoring service. If you wanted to learn how to trick scammers into making embarrassing, demeaning pictures and sending videos, they would match you up with someone who would actually share information about how to do this, such as techniques they'd used or strategies that worked for them. Scam baiting is dubbed a sport and a game. This page says, even if you are a newcomer, much fun can be had and you will be doing a public service. And there's lots of sites like this. 419 is just the biggest and the oldest one. Started in 2003, so it's really old. But scambaiter.com is also pretty vigorous. You can see there's some pictures of people doing a milk baptism, which we're going to talk about as one of the tropes that scam baiters make would-be scammers do. There's some obscene signs, and there's some pictures of people who are made to pose naked, which was another thing scam baiters often ask people to do, is to pose nude. And here's one called 419baiter.com, and that woman is nude behind her sign. So 419 Eater is a really close-knit, extremely active community. They have FAQs, tutorials, legal advice, tons and tons of information on how to get started. This is quite old, as I said. In 2006, Wired magazine wrote an admiring article documenting their work, noting that the site's founder, a British man who goes by the pseudonym Jeremy Timber, started in 2003, so it's really quite old. The mentoring program is dead, by the way. I registered as a user and tried to get a mentor just to see what happened. They don't have anybody, so I guess they're too busy. Here's an image of a tattoo that somebody was tricked into getting as a way to show that they were sincere, as a proof of good faith. There are several photographs of tattoos people have gotten, been tricked into getting and such. So the site makers of 419 Eater are really aware that this looks racist because it is racist. However, they're eager to counter this perception. They have a part of the home screen that explains it should be noted that scam baiters do not go actively seeking scammers of a particular skin color. We only engage thieves who send us emails trying to steal from us. We do not target any particular type of person or country, but the images tell their own story. I mean, well over 90% of the images are African people. There are a few Eastern European women doing marriage scams or mail order bride scams, and there's a few other non-African people, but they almost all are. Jenna Burrell, who's written a great book on internet cafes in Ghana, says the emergence of internet scamming destabilizes an assumed relationship between technological and socioeconomic progress. So it's precisely because Africa is the largest, one of the largest and most quickly growing nations of internet users, use photographs, fake ID cards, webcams, and other imaging practices are used by the people she talked to anyway to meet a foreigner's expectations in ways that would help them get some kind of advantage. So I think, as Richard said, the hype around cyberspace was that we would all get to be free and make ourselves in whichever way we chose. I think this is really a fascinating example of how financial exigency and neocolonialism have made it so that others must make themselves exactly as others want them to. So this is less like making yourself from scratch than the subservient chicken video, which you might remember, where it was one of the earliest viral video advertising campaigns where people would tell a chicken, as a Burger King commercial, what to do. They would type in a command in a box and the chicken would do it. So this was liveness, right, interactivity, but also the pleasure of controlling another person, subservience. So it's kind of in line with sex cams in more ways than it was about other kinds of presence. And so what Burrell writes about is how the space where the complex and problematic conditions of post-colonial and embodied identity are played out. So she talks about scam baiter trophy videos as part of a bargain between poor vigilantes and less poor, if not rich vigilantes, both trying to scam the other. So I'm not saying that scam baiters are rich, right? They're not. But what we've got here are two groups who are trying to exploit each other. One to provide interesting, unique, freakish, spectacular content as trophy, reputation building techniques, and others because they actually are trying to survive, right? The options in Ghana and many parts of Africa are really poor for getting a job. As Burrell writes, a lot of people who contact Americans and Europeans from Africa are not trying to scam, they're just trying to make a friend, maybe find someone who would help them finance education, maybe somebody who will just talk to them in English, right? Make some kind of connection. They value the network itself. So there are lots of trophy videos that also circulate on the internet. I'm going to talk about where they've been and where they go, because they're consumed by huge numbers of people who have no idea what these images are or where they're from. Memes are defined as such because they move across these different and illegible contexts, discourses, and networks. They iterate as much as possible. Like the common cold, no one really knows where they come from, right? They just know that they have it, or they know that somebody else has it. Social media is mimetic in nature, right? The share button, as Johannes was saying, is utterly native and expected on all applications and devices. So not just our software on social networks, but the hardware too. So when you make a video, the share button is right next to the record button, right? It's not an accident, that's true. So I'm going to show a video of something that was made by some scam baiters.
Thank you, son. Thank you, son.
Okay, so this video went somewhat viral, right? Not as much as the manta ray, but it was pretty popular. A lot of people didn't know what it was, and they were curious. What was disturbing to me is when they found out what it was, many people said, good for them. I'm so glad somebody's keeping the internet safe for us. Right? Those people deserve that and more. I'm so glad somebody's humiliating them. So this form of photographic production is surreal, bizarre, it's Baroque. It is definitely abject. It's an exercise in power for its own sake. It creates a new aesthetic language of the primitive. These are not unintelligible or nonsensical behaviors if you take into account the way the primitive has been modeled, especially in reference to Africa. And And interestingly, to counter the perception of Nigerians as sophisticated information-age subjects, I think of a movie like District 13, I think it was, that was depicted Nigerians in a similar kind of way. So the image of the milk baptism is really common in a lot of these pictures. It's kind of parody of a religious service. The visual regime of the trophies includes things like men wearing women's clothes, clearly, feminizing them, or naked, parodying religious ritual, the objection of African masculinity, as in I give BJ's as a tattoo, the merging of humor, porn, performance, and race. Here's one that I just had to show because it's not like the others. Almost all of the others are traditional pillory pictures. So there's a picture of a sign, and then there's a picture of a person, or a picture of a tattoo and a picture of the person. This is a really unusual one, and it went really viral. I mean, I found it in at least 10 different places, but it originated on 419eater.com. So these men were told to specifically put pickles in their mouths, wear bras, hold this guy in this way, they have something on their heads, and so on. So this is a really kind of symmetrical image of the classic primitive, just like on a cigar box. It's like this heraldic, very, very stylized image of the primitive. It's a meme much older than the internet. It's very interesting that this showed up. And it traveled all over the place before it got to 419eater. You can see these, as I said, in ads, artworks. As I said, it's no new thing for Western audiences to compel Africans, Filipinos, Aborigines, and other subaltern groups to perform themselves as primitive, right? This was what the World's Fair in St. Louis was about. Going to see Filipinos climbing trees and husking coconuts. They later went out and got hot dogs and ice cream like everybody else. But they were there to embody the savage, right? To bring people into the world outside of the US, which is what the internet is supposed to do, right? It's global village. However, modernity is defined by the promiscuous proliferation of those images, trafficking between sites distant and at one time unconnected. Postmodernity is about the disappearance of that difference, right? It's about subservience in real time, which is what this is. Created purpose-made, kind of bespoke images of primitivism to meet the needs of Western consumers. So, well, it's quite possible that the performers in the scan baiting video I showed you are in on the joke because the people standing in the background seem utterly nonplussed, right? They have these complacent expressions like, oh, this happens every day. Someone comes out here and makes a video for these crazy Americans. It implies that this is custom-made nonsensical media that happens all the time, nothing out of the ordinary, which is disturbing in itself. The viral media that are made in this way may not be shaming to these individuals. They may not feel shame. They might not even know they're up, but they are nonetheless shameful. The production of trophy media that depicts Africans as sexually subservient or deviant, as unsophisticated dupes of superior Western internet users, as abject, may not be experienced by objects as shaming, but who's to say? As Poignant wrote in her study of Sally, Billy, and the other people from Queensland who were exhibited by R.A. Cunningham, I showed you that family beforehand, it is almost impossible to obtain information about how her subjects felt about the whole enterprise. How do they feel being photographed and displayed? Because they were themselves media. They did not make it. To quote from Blade Runner, they were not in the business of media, they were the business. There was no documentation about what they said, what they thought, they didn't write anything, they simply disappeared. When scan baiters are made to produce abject media, which then becomes part of the grist that allows the mill of social media to grind, we are witnessing a new form of imperial power in the post-digital age. So the system of incentives that motivated Sally, Billy, and other North Queenslanders to post for their pictures was very different from that which motivates these people in the trophy room, but there are some similarities. In the first case, racist science justified the abduction and display of people of color. In the second, neoliberal and neocolonial economics provided the motivation. Scan baiters make these images of themselves because this constitutes the best of a poor set of options to partially exploit the West, as it itself has been so thoroughly exploited. So when Jenna Burrell interviewed would-be scammers, and I want to emphasize, none of these people have scammed anybody yet, right? This is punishment in advance of the fact. It's deterrence. But when she interviewed people in Ghana who were using the internet, some of whom had scammed or thought about it or were maybe going to do it, but maybe hadn't done it yet, they justified doing so based on radically uneven power relations, saying that they're just going to get a little bit back of what was taken, right? That they can't go to America and England to get jobs. They're going to try to get a little bit back. That's what they have in mind. And I don't want to defend scamming as a crime. That is not the goal. Zook, who published an article about this, claimed $3.1 billion were lost as a result of internet advance fee fraud. So I don't have any reason to doubt this. It's probably true. He says that this crime has damaged the brand equity of Nigeria, stigmatizing the people as untrustworthy and unscrupulous. And this is true, I know. So I'm going to show you a little bit more about these images. Okay. So this image traveled quite a lot. This is an image from Harmony Central, which is a bulletin board that's for music lovers. And the subtitle is, 1st of 2010, caption this photo, please. So people put in funny captions. There's some funny ones in there. It appeared as well in 2010 on a website called Draw Drops. And it was specifically about, what are some weird images you've seen lately? Something funny, something weird and amazing, and it appeared there. And then it appeared in 2009 in a site called F as in Fun, which is specifically for funny or viral video or images. And it lists this as being one of the funniest scam baiting images ever, and cites 419 Eater as a source. So here it's not unknown where this came from or why. There's a link to 419 Eater, and people love this image. They think it is the most hilarious thing they've ever seen. One or two people said it was racist, right? But then others quickly jumped on them and told them they were wrong. Relatively few women's images appear in the trophy room, as I said, really, really few. The vast majority are African men. And a few white women, Eastern European women, but almost no African women. I could really only find one. In some ways, this is no surprise. The digital divide in Africa is serious. It's been called the second digital divide by Intel. In 2013, they found that on average, 23% fewer women than men are online in developing countries. This represents 200 million fewer women than men who are online today. That's a huge difference. So percentage-wise, it doesn't sound like that much, but it is huge. In some regions like sub-Saharan Africa, the size of the gap exceeds 40%. So that's got something to do with this, perhaps. So this slide, as I told you, is really anomalous. It says, "I will do everything that I am asked," and it's a picture of a woman's face. It did not go viral. Well, most other images in the archive show men in abject positions, simulating fellatio, wearing fruit and vegetables in their heads, women's clothes, performing nonsensical acts. This one really stands out because I think it's a frank and honest depiction of how the traffic in mimetic digital images on social networks actually works, or rather how the sausage is made. This image did not go viral. There are no pickles, no bras, no milk baptism. It doesn't meet any of the requirements. It's not weird, it's not funny. It attests to the value of the meme to visualize an unequal power relation. So it's not viral because it's not surprising, it's not sad, it's not shocking, it's just sad. As Kara Keeling has written, the Afrofuturist movement is a response to catastrophe. The catastrophe of slavery and later neo-imperialism, and as she argues, part of the purchase of Afrofuturism today is that other things didn't work. Right? The other forms of living are not succeeding. Capitalism, neocolonialism is just not working. Africa is part of the traffic in memes, but as is the case with coltan, an absolutely essential mineral in the production of mobile phones and other things, these images are extracted as resources and do not produce value in their own local context. So these images circulate and are really prized in Euro-American image boards, but I don't think they're viewed as funny in African image boards. I don't think they have the same function there. Africa's role, at least in these viral images, reflects the disadvantaged position within society, within the world, using the very representations of Africa defined apart from and against them by hegemonic forces. And that's Jenna Burrell, right? So she has an idea for why these look the way they do, why people are made to enact the savage. And again, Africa and Africans are not they're not in the business, they are the business in this case, right? They're not profiting from this. So we need a social media image ethics that acknowledges the conditions of production of memes, which is really hard to find. I mean, you really need to be a forensic sleuth and spend a lot of time sometimes to find out where these things come from. Know Your Meme will help you a little bit. I found out about the photobomb with the manta ray from there, and there's other images. If they go viral enough, they'll actually go back and do a genealogy for you, and they'll tell you when it trended and who started it and all that. But not all of these things end up there. So the ones I'm showing you aren't on Know Your Meme. If you want to know where they're from, you have to go and look on your own. You have to do it yourself. So media scholarship knows how to do this. This is something we are trained to do, to explore the genealogy, distribution, aesthetics, and visual history and production culture of these images, the metaculture, so much of which is racist, sexist, and comes to us with no context in particular, other than that this is a funny image, or do you know what this is? So we can only unearth this information through a painstaking process of archaeology. As Coco Fusco wrote in regards to photography, race exists to be seen, to be consumed. It is itself spectacular. As we have moved from paper to screens, the origins of these images matter even more, for they wander even more radically out of context than their predecessors did. So I'm thinking of work about things like lynching postcards, which were made to travel. I mean, that's what postcards do. They're literally made to circulate as far and as widely as possible. And these are very much like that, right? That's what they do. Only they're out of context even more than those things were, because those were captioned. And they would often have a date, or they would say, I was at this lynching, it was really, great, or whatever. So the lack of context is partly what challenges scholarship that wants to work on this. Part of this work came out of a talk I gave at American Studies when we were discussing technology studies in America and American culture. In 2006, American Quarterly put out an issue on technology, and half of the articles were about railroads. And so the thinking was that we needed to update it a little bit, maybe, since things have happened since then. And so I talked about how we could do digital media scholarship or digital media theory in the context of American interdisciplinary studies. And I said the two hardest things to study were Facebook, because of issues around privacy, but also radical kind of personalization that makes it hard to study, right? And the way the algorithms in Facebook work is something most of us aren't trained to talk about, but we're all using it. And the other is the transnational, because most of us lack language skills, but there are also different nomadic cultures in different places. So Ethan Zuckerman's written some interesting work on Makmende, which is an African meme that traveled everywhere, but that most Americans know nothing about. So I was trying to address some of that in this paper, and talking about it as a challenge as well as attempting to try and meet that challenge a little bit myself. So racial violence is absolutely the foundation for all the images I've shown, as they are for the Antoine Dodson and Sweet Brown music videos. So you've seen the Antoine Dodson Bed Intruder video? I'm not going to show it, but it's a really good video, really disturbing. The Sweet Brown one is the one where she says, "Ain't nobody got time for that." It's a song. So she's suing Apple because they circulated that without her permission, and they made a ton of money off of that. But those are both stories about racial violence. Antoine Dodson's sister was almost raped. Sweet Brown's house was on fire and she had to run away from it, right? She almost died. So taking these stories of tragedy in racialized environments and turning them into songs and capitalizing on them is absolutely the way that social media works, right? These and other spectacular images of people of color, often men queered by the image economy of scam baiting. I mean, these images are so overtly about trying to emasculate African men, it seems to me. That is absolutely the goal, right? Is to queer it, to emasculate it, to somehow erase it. Well, a few commenters on the image boards I looked at, where the pickle and diaper image said that it was racist, most just gloated at the punishment and how appropriate it was, right? If you're going to scam somebody on the internet, you will be scammed on the internet. A digital media archaeology that would investigate or at least acknowledge the conditions of racial coercion and enforced primitivism that gave rise to these pictures would at least give the viewer a chance to reflect on what the like or share button really does, how it performs race and gender in the late age of capital and the social networking economies that reflect it. Thank you. Oh, right. Well, sometimes people have comments they think of later. So. I'm kind of afraid of what Tom will say if he's actually an anthropologist. So, yeah.
You mentioned that the requests for the images were often to like recreate
Mm-hmm.
another, and I
I didn't show those, actually I have one here. This is Graham Parker's. And so he has a project on spam baiting, which is totally different because it just looks at these kinds of images. So this is the first image on the upper left. It's got Marilyn Monroe and Elvis. And these are all recreations that people who were contacted by spam baiters made to show they were real people. So it's the proof of life concept. The ones I'm looking at are based on written instructions. So someone will say, you know, I'm a missionary, want to open a mission in Africa and give you $1 million to run it. But we do something called milk baptism. Can you send me promotional materials for our website by showing us some pictures of how you will do that when we build our mission? Right, so they're trying to scam them back, and then the demands get more and more obscene and crazy and ridiculous. So somebody was asked to build a go-kart, wear a watermelon hat made of half a watermelon, and be towed up a hill by a Mercedes and video it. And there is a video of it. I didn't show it because I don't have time. But all this content is so much like dive museum stuff. Like, it is stuff that is purposely as weird and bizarre as possible. The idea is to make it harder and harder and harder for the would-be spammer until they eventually just stop. So there's a couple different ways to do it that I know of. Maybe there's more even. But the whole point is to waste the resources of the individual who's doing these and also to get trophies so that you can show how good you are at tricking these people that you don't know.
I wasn't familiar with some of the images that you showed, but I remember seeing early on that there were some scam baiters where they had rather benign requests, asking the people on the other end to create some kind of art object out of wood. But I was wondering if you had thought about or looked at how these images began escalate over time, and how the community of scam baiters, how they would try to one-up each other, and how the memes start to become more and more obscene and more ridiculous. And if it's a consequence of really the community trying to exchange some kind of social capital in this exchange?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the part that didn't make it in this presentation. But yeah, there's totally this culture of masculine competition in 419eater.com, right? Where they refer to the people they're victimizing as lads. And indeed, what they're doing is laddish behavior. I'm not British, but I know this has a special meaning. Vicky Nash knows what it is. What would you describe laddish? Just stupid?
Yeah, teenage bedroom boy behavior.
Yeah. So that's what it is. It's creating this youthful transgressiveness, which is cool and all about this kind of youthful masculinity. And most of them are not young, from what I can tell. But there's a culture of internet pranksterism, which does become this virtuous vigilantism. So Anonymous is a good example of an organization that was just a trolling organization. We talked about this for a long time, just messing with people, shouting the word nigger at conferences on Twitter, ruining Habbo Hotel, like doing all this racist stuff, showing up in blackface at various virtual worlds. And now they're a virtuous social activist organization. So there's this move that people can make where they go from being self-organized haters to being self-organized protectors of the internet, right? And so I think that's what these people are doing, only they haven't successfully made that move. They've made it in their mind, right? I don't think that that's actually happened, though, some people do. So, yeah.
Well, I wondered, on that point, if you maybe could talk a bit more about that. You mentioned 4chan and its relationship to Anonymous, been written about, the idea that both that there's a kind of escalation, even in 4chan's context, or that you give an image that you reworked and more elaborate, but that cycle of competitive reworking, leading, going alongside is heading toward a kind of virtuous activism you talk about, right? One element that some people, like Coleman and others, have noted about Anonymous is that idea that it seems born out of some notion that anyone who takes themselves too seriously online should be lampooned, right? Which comes both under the umbrella of, well, playfulness is its own justification on the one hand, and then kind of puncturing a kind of self-importance, right? So if you see that element in here, I mean, that's partly what animates Anonymous's efforts against that.
for the lulz, there's no doubt, right? There's a kind of trickster ethos, which isn't, I won't just dismiss as being silly. It actually is an ethos of trying to puncture pompousness. That there's so much pompousness around, it needs to be brought down a peg. But the objects of that bringing down are not that. And so what's interesting to me is how the mechanism of a debasement, right, a proper bringing to a right level is leveled at exactly the wrong people. And so it becomes this kind of really egregious form of racism. In fact, people find it funny because they almost don't believe this could really be happening because it's so racist. Right? No one does that kind of racism anymore. Right? We're post-racial. Now we just don't hire people, right, because of their race and never say so. But this kind of racism is so old-fashioned. It almost can't read as sincere, which is partly why I think it is not viewed that way.
Well, on whose behalf do they feel they're doing it? Is it on behalf of those who they imagine would be taken in?
Yeah, that's what they say. So some nice old grandmother who writes back to a Nigerian boy and sends him money and then loses their life savings. And in fact, those things have happened and they're very prominent on the website. They want you to know they're doing this for a reason and that they're protecting you, the reader. Though I don't believe any of the people on the site would ever be taken in by any of these. Right? They're not themselves who they're protecting. So it's in the name of basically older white women, oftentimes. Kind of interesting. Yeah.
It's fascinating though, because if you hit the hypermasculinity, the offensively overdetermined hypermasculinity of these sites, with the escalation that happens, combined with the phrasing like lads, right?
Mhm.
Get is a slight tweak in the direction of hazing, so that you have, rather than a protectionist ethos, you have a paternalistic one, so that the guys running these sites are almost inducting these Africans into a Western elite institution. I mean, it's a different kind of tweak to it, but the hazing kind of works. It's the same kind of thing, like something people.
Yeah, hazing is an interesting way to put it because it implies an initiation to a society that you will eventually belong to. And so I don't think there's any endpoint to this hazing, but some of the ritual aspects of it seem like hazing. I gave this talk somewhere else and people mentioned Abu Ghraib, that they thought they were like that they were, posing people in abject positions so as to take trophies and to show the power that they had. But there's a difference. I mean, people don't really have to make these videos. It's just that the economic options are such that it's something that people consider doing. Though I don't believe everybody who responds to these, scam baiters would even want to scam them. Sometimes they just want to actually do it, make a connection to them. So it's really hard to tell intention when you're talking about people who probably are not going to want to be interviewed by you for lots of reasons, and things that have happened 12 years ago, or 6 years ago rather, which is the case for some of these things. But yeah, it definitely looks like this kind of, like what frats do around masculinity, making men run around in their underwear and stuff. In Michigan, they don't do too much of that, but I know they do it other places, and it often takes form of sexual kind of humiliation.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how these proliferate beyond the caption, because I was thinking a lot about when you talk about memes. The nature of memes is that they are self-contained.
Mhm.
They need no caption, right?
Mhm.
That's what they're all about. And yet these images, when you're talking about them, it seems like their history is what keeps them going and proliferating. So have you seen these images being used outside of the caption, where people are using them and not knowing what they're actually using?
Yeah, the ones I put up in here, it's because I'm sorry you can't see them, but they almost all say, what is this image? Right, so a meme, as you say, is self-contained. It doesn't need a caption, the photobomb of the manta ray. You don't need to know what that is. It tells you. These circulate because people don't know what they are. And that's interesting. They often invite explanation. So what could this be? And people come up with, it's like the New Yorker cartoon challenge. They come up with a funny kind of explanation of it. So that's very interesting, though, that question of history, because I think these look like they are from a different historical time. That's partly why they're so confounding. It's hard to imagine they were made 5 years ago or a year ago, but many of them were. So this one, I mean, you know, it's really hard to say when it could have been made. It could have been made lots of different times. So I think in some ways these appeal because they're an ahistorical primitive, you know, and also that kind of abject, queer, unintelligible thing, which is what memes are a lot of times. So animals doing insane things and such. But that's a really good point. I will write that as part of our revision.
I'm still very intrigued by the video that has people in the background who are very nonchalant and blasé about what was happening. And it makes me wonder how these images circulate in Nigeria, since that's the context. Is it strictly a case that the iconography is the Western primitive, or is there a way in which this is tapping into formal performance traditions, into iconography that's more local or indigenous? In other words, what do we know about the agential aspect of things on the other side, so to speak?
Yeah, I didn't have time to read through some of the scripts, but most of them are extremely specific about what they want the images to be. So they are not meant to allow people to express indigenous cultures or just perform something neat and send it to me, right? Instead, they are, get this specific kind of fruit and put it in your mouth in this way, and I want you to have this many people, and I want you to pour the milk in this way and have a fish. So some people have carrots strapped over their heads. You know, so the idea is that no one would do this as part of any cultural practice. It's a sui generis, odd thing, because if it were a cultural practice that existed, you could find that somewhere else. So trying to make something that is totally unique and weird and also subservient, like do it exactly this way or I won't send you money. Like that's always the interaction. Like I want you to do these 8 things, and I want the video to be this long, and I want it to be this kind of car, and then I'll send you $500. And so they do it, and then it comes back, wait, we need you to do this now. So when you look at those, you kind of think, yeah, is there some kind of interesting indigenous, but no, absolutely not.
Maybe not tapping into a sort of existing indigenous culture, but certainly there's got to be a shared aspect that's developed from these things. So it's hard to believe that you just have isolated figures in different parts of the country who are doing this without knowing that other people are doing it as well. So that's what I was wondering about, how these images and videos circulate in Nigeria. They're mimetic.
Yeah.
Certainly the circulation wouldn't be limited strictly to the West.
Yeah, Burrell's book writes a little bit more about that, but it's more about usage in cafes. There's almost no research on this at all. And it's not surprising because we almost never research cultures that are not our own. So there may be a co-productive aspect of what this is, but it's hard to say what it would be. It could be that people are totally in on it and laughing the whole time and feel no embarrassment or abjection. Maybe that's projected onto the image by the viewer, but nonetheless, the intention of the person who caused the image to be made was abjection. Right? So whether the people within it feel that way, the purpose of the image as it circulates is to create this African that that cannot be male, can't be technical, can't be, normal. So,
So, a little comment first. I hope that at this conference in particular, this is not representative at all, that we can question the story of Anonymous as virtuous, because to me that fits into a deeply techno-utopian view, and I think a lot of what Anonymous does even today is important. And when I look at their, and I'll talk about that in some of my own talk, but something that this made me think of, I think is related to that, the story that these scams are conducted by Nigerians is itself a meme and a rumor, right? That is not entirely clear, right? And in fact, saying in the first place that it comes from Nigeria, right? Like the number of actual documented scams like this are pretty small. So that my impression would be a lot of Nigerian people may have heard these stories and think, oh, maybe we can go get money by doing this thing, but in fact, that's all a rumor, right? And so there's like this double, and I want to say one other thing, which is Nigeria is one of the most devastated countries by world post-colonial politics and the politics of oil in particular, right? And so these are people who have been absolutely attacked and had their resources stripped away by multinational capital. And probably most of the people involved who have gotten targeted by this are not actually scammers in the sense that the people think they are. So the number of virtue that has been put around this is just totally fake.
Right.
There isn't actually anything virtuous about this. It is, and I wonder if, is there any, forgetting the racism thing, which is kind of obvious, right? And I'm sure there's a little bit of angry discussion of that. Is there any discussion of the larger context of like what is happening in Nigeria? Why these people would be wanting to try to get money from the West? Did anybody even talk about that?
Never. No, because that would totally go against the logic of what this is about, right? So as you say, it has to be this image of virtuous kind of hacktivism. You know, it's part of that same complex. And I agree with you about Anonymous, but you know, it's part of the rehabilitation of these groups is to rebrand under the name of.
Get rid of one issue for a minute. There is a way in which this is a kind of hacking of capitalism, right? What the Nigerian people are doing, right? And you might imagine if the hacktivists were as virtuous as they did, like championing this at some level, right? It is like cutting right into the system and being like, I'm going to gain you, right? And right, it's all no. That when push comes to shove, like the power's going to go the way the direction it's always going.
Right. I mean, part of the critique of this is one Christian Fuchs might make, which is that, Facebook and Google are really the robber barons here. They're the ones who are scamming everybody. They take our content and sell it back to us, right? These guys are at least making original content. They're not like forcing us to buy back our own status updates and pictures of our kids. So in some ways, there is a more virtuous kind of exchange going on here, even though it's extremely racist, as you say. So yeah, there's a really strong economic critique of viewing Nigerian scammers or would-be scammers or even just people who try to talk to strangers as being the true exploiters here, right? It's definitely the social media and industries that are the exploiters. So, yeah, Simone.
Well, there's a book called A Culture of Corruption that talks about this exact thing by Daniel Smith, I think it is, about dissent and how people challenge that. But also, I think in answer to the question, I think it came from that side, like there's also the Nigerian government that would put signs up and billboards saying this is not for sale. Beware of 419. And like Nollywood movies on 419. And the song I Will Chop Your Dollar. So there's a kind of culture of talking back to this as well too. So the idea of having a billboard is that people would say, I own this, I own that. We can sell you this house. And people would paint over their house saying not for sale, beware of 419. I think there's a large awareness of this, the scam being situated as something that's coming out of Nigeria, but there's some work from UBC that shows that the IP addresses aren't coming out of Nigeria to a large extent, and so it's how Nigeria again gets racialized and criminalized in this way by even just naming the scam 419.
Right, that's a good point. I mean, Nigeria's become a kind of abject bad actor in terms of internet identities, and a lot of that has become totally exploited by other people. So it's become a very undesirable stigma to have anything to do with the country, which is incredibly it's terrible. I mean, there's lots of people who have, as Burrell says in different parts of Africa and Nigeria, pretty, very good and nascent computer skills, and they would have a lot to offer any kind of company that wanted to hire them. And when they try to make connections that might result in those kinds of things, because the industry natively isn't there, the reaction is always terrible because of this. That's a good point.
I just want to mention Brian Larkin at Columbia.
Oh, yeah.
He is the person who does Nigerian media. I don't know that he's looked at this yet, but he knows the deeper context of media use in Nigeria, and I'm sure that really.
They've been talking about the impression that's made of Nigeria. You talked about children living online nowadays. Have there been any studies that have followed up to determine whether images like this, among at least teens, are recreating that 19th century notion of the primitive and the savage and so forth? And so, in effect, the racial implications of this are being perpetrated by that traffic in the teens?
You know, it's so hard to study social media because you don't really know the age of who's using it usually. Most of them say you have to be 13 or older. Some say 16 or older. But the image boards I'm looking at, people are just any age. And 4chan is pretty famous for having fairly young users. So I don't know if they're like measurable pernicious effects, but I would imagine so. You know, I mean, this is decontextualized racism that you're invited to laugh at. And when you see it in the context of a website that's called F is for funny, or F is for fun, you're kind of primed to take it as fun and think this is fun. It's fun times, but, you know, not. But, mhm.
Yeah, I was thinking about what it would mean to laugh at this and to be on those sites. And I guess, I mean, the other side of what you're talking about is that these sites are building are racialised and I guess you were saying gender as well, solidarity amongst the users who are the broiler and eaters. And maybe that's kind of obvious, but it just occurred to me. But I guess the question is, I mean, how generalised do you think that is on 4chan, in social media? I mean, that kind of operation where I guess like people feel like, you know, that's who's being inducted, and not being hazed, right, but being inducted into some kind of solidarity on these sites. Is that right?
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I think I'd have to look at 4chan a lot more than I do now, and I kind of don't want to look at 4chan more than I do now. So, you know, I know that other people have done some more quantitative research, but not on racism in 4chan or on community and masculinity, because it's an anonymous community. So you can kind of assume things about people by pronouns they use and such, but it's really hard to say. But yeah, I would say it's part of a formative identity of kind of mimetic culture that is a kind of masculine culture, for sure. So, you know, the kind of nerd, geek, gamer identity is very much claimed by men, and as Mia Consalvo's written, there's been so much violence against women lately, like Anita Sarkeesian and other women who are in gaming, because it's not their world anymore. So as women start to show up more and men realize they're not going to leave, then it becomes much, much worse, which is part of the theory about racial minorities as fun exotics when there's two of them, but when there's a lot, then it becomes this horrible yellow peril or this kind of, let's build a wall or do something. So I think that, you're probably witnessing a kind of similar struggle, but it's very hard to know exactly how it works, but yeah.
Just in your own media archaeology, have you ever seen this be recontextualized as racist?
Yes, a little bit. There was a slide I didn't get to show that was totally great. Somebody took the "That's Racist" meme, which is a little boy from Wonder Chosen. It's actually in Know Your Meme. It's this little animated GIF of a little boy shouting "That's racist" over and over and over again. And they simply posted that in response to one of these. I think it was on Harmony Central. They just posted that. They didn't say anything else. They just posted "That's racist" looping over and over. And I was interested in that because it's really not cool to ever talk about racism. It makes you too serious. You need to be punctured. You're too pompous, right? You can't do it. But if you put up a meme that says that, it's okay because now you're inside, right? You get it. So you're part of the culture. You can critique it. But if someone like me were to respond and say, "This is really racist, please take it down," there's, oh God, who are you? Like, what's your problem? Often, when I used to play World of Warcraft a lot more, when I would report people for racist names or for racist things, they would tell me, "Grow up." That was the most common comment I got. "Grow up, you are so immature."
Just to quickly point out, I think that GIF has been recontextualized yet again to be used in sort of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, as like, hey, I'm Reddit anyway. It's kind of that's racist, but it's used as, I don't know if you've seen the one with it has chicken from
Yeah,
and all
I've
this
seen
other,
it. It's really good.
and all this stuff. And it's almost used in a way, I think, in some cases to say, yeah, this is really racist. Haha, it's still funny though.
Right.
Which I think adds another layer of really questioning, like, are people saying,
oh yeah, this is totally racist. And what you know what I'm gonna say is, isn't it funny that it's kind of racist? Which sort of, I mean, I know that that's like, I can't even explain this very well because it's like so mind-boggling that that would be the case, but I think that it's almost been repurposed in the same way that, you know, other things happen on Reddit or 4chan where people are sort of saying, oh, we know that this is racist, but it's okay because this is the space for that kind of talk.
Right.
And we're gonna reinterpret this, you know, this kind of meaning again to say this.
You should write about that, because this is where the conversation about race is happening, because no one will do it anywhere else. My students won't talk about race in our class about race. So I have a class called Race and Digital Media and Video Games. No one will talk about the race part. So people are so burned by talking about race, and they're so scared of being called a racist or actually being a racist or being the victim of racism, that social media is where it's happening because there's some protection, right? Some anonymity, you can have irony. And so none of us as scholars have any idea how to study this, I think. I really do. That I'm trying, but I think none of us know how, because it is a totally different medium and a totally different platform with a set of historical assumptions and a background that may be short, but is complicated. And that's not available to someone who's not in it. And so this is where the forensic part comes in, right? You have to really immerse yourself in this culture to have anything to say about it. Otherwise, you really have done a disservice. So people who are anthropologists have this big advantage because they understand that. Media scholars have a big disadvantage because you think you can just read the image and talk about it like it was a film or a painting. And you totally can't, because it's a communicative artifact and it's co-produced with other people and so on. So I think this is absolutely the crucial place to be if you're studying anything around identity. Because the national conversations, we're retreating away from that. It's almost impossible to do it. Our own president didn't talk about race ever because he is black. And so, you know, if you go on Reddit, you will see conversation about it, but it will be of a kind that requires a lot of kind of advanced knowledge to frame and understanding of how, you know, as you say, a meme can kind of turn really quickly. And that's the point, right? Just like colds become other colds and flus become other flus, same.
I just wondered, great presentation by the way, as always. I wondered if you could say a bit more about your interpretation of moral norms behind these various meanings. I thought it was interesting that you contrasted, if you like, the image of the mother who chained her daughter online with, you know, some of the sort of context that these photographs arise. So you've got a scenario in one case where you have a mother who assumes, genuinely thinks she's punishing her daughter for her daughter's own good. And then you've got context where some of these pictures are created and circulated, in which, in some cases, the description is about doing social good vigilantes of the sort, and others that describe it more as just the best fun you can have on the internet.
Yeah.
So I guess I just wonder whether you found anything interesting in the sort of the broader moral norms around shaming and production of these sort of images.
You know, I haven't thought about that, but I know I should, because shaming is itself the meme of 2013 in some ways. So it's not just the year of internet hate, it really is the year now of everybody being so aware of the perils of publicity. So all of a sudden people take off their blinders and realize, oh my God, the stuff I put on the internet will still be there, as if no one was thinking about this, right? So this is what researchers like Dana Boyd call security through obscurity. People subscribed to that notion until pretty recently and just didn't think about it. And now there's this incredible kind of wave of shame that people are experiencing, and terror, right? So what about all that stuff from that time I went out and partied a lot last year, right? So I think that what you say about parenting is very interesting, because you could say parenting is licensed vigilantism. You have this option to be as creative as you can to make things work. And there aren't any laws in that way. I mean, there's another video I had, because I wanted to balance it out. There's a lot of child shaming of a man who shot his daughter's laptop with a rifle and put the video on her Facebook and talked about her to her friends and said what a terrible, he called her a bitch and all this kind of thing. So, you know, that's not about painted signs and funny dead dogs. Like, that is totally about taking every kind of ethical law in regards to children, in regards to the public, in regards to this person's life, and totally trampling on it. So I think I'm interested in the dark side of vigilantism, because I feel like this year has also been this year of celebrating bad vigilantism. right? So self-organization, Clay Shirky's work on organizing without organizations. It sounds really good if the organization isn't this, right? So I did this partly as a reaction to this user-generated everything, which you see, which is going to solve the problems of gatekeeping, solve the problem of overpriced media, solve the problem of everything. And I don't think it solves any problems particularly, but it does create a lot of new problems. So maybe I'm being extremely pessimistic, but I think that eventually, this is going to be the kind of rude awakening of that moment, is seeing what did we make people do for our amusement? Our children or people in other countries, what did we do and what did it mean? So, yeah.
I think it'd be fantastic if we did some work on that, but I suppose for me it also then leads into discussion about gender, for example, and in particular in relation to things like sex images. So one of the reasons I'm asking about more launch is I think that actually the whole shaming thing precisely sort of legitimates, as you say, vigilantism, which is often assumed to have this broader social good, that almost confuses it with the individual feeling there's some sort of moral purpose to their action when they generate an image which is there for the purpose of punishing another.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. When you talk about shaming, you have to talk about sexting, and I didn't. But that's absolutely what this is about. High-profile cases, people getting arrested, and themselves shamed. So, one girl has a reputation ruined, and one boy goes to jail. So, in neither case is that appropriate, right? But that's what happens. So, yeah.
Maybe I've been reading too much Foucault. So my question really is about the production of shame itself through these acts of technological representation. Because I think we're in this quandary where at one point we're observing that we live in a shameless world, where there is no shame, which is why people are doing many of the things that they do, and they feel no shame about sharing them on the internet. But then is it a backlash or what, that technology is also being used to try to create a sense of shame, which there is none for us? We live in this postmodern anxiety where there are no more meta-narratives that really enforce shame, so we have this kind of rhizomatic world of shame production through the digital, which isn't really tied to any believed in registers of moral or ethical or religious belief, but to sensations. So that we have this simulacrum of shame, but it's really just a sensation that we're circulating amongst ourselves so we can feel this simulation of shame, but it really doesn't have any moral content.
Whoa, okay. I don't think that...
I haven't read too much.
No, that's great, because I would say, maybe we're in a more Deleuzian moment, where it's not so much about shame per se, but about the circulation of affect through these control societies, right? That the reason that people make these images is that it's not a society of discipline, but a society of control. So now we're in a moment where you can't force anybody to mine coltan. You can just make it economically necessary or even indispensable for them to do so. And so I think that, projecting, it's very easy, I think, for people to project emotions onto these images. That's what they're kind of for. And so, of course, I'm outraged. I feel shame myself, even for looking at them in some ways. So I think the circulation of shame is an unaccountable one, and that's why memes are interesting, because memes do that, right? They circulate those affects, which shame is among them, but also humor. I mean, really, this is at the context of humor. All these things come from humor websites. There's really no websites that aren't humor websites that ever show these images, except for Wired, because Wired loves vigilantes.
So there may be a nostalgia for shame in a world of shamelessness, where we're producing shame in the absence of it. And it also takes me back to earlier on you showed some representations of late 19th, early 20th century racist imagery. But almost all that imagery was connected in a logical way to production of capital. And we understood how the exploitation of such images was directly related to the production of wealth. But much of this seems not to be connected in a direct way to the accumulation of it's a different kind of primitive accumulation that we're getting here. And it's very hard to tell who's actually accumulating capital from this, whether it's just ideological capital, whether it's affective capital, but it's certainly hard to prove that it's monetary capital at some primary level.
It is definitely symbolic capital. If you could see this better, you'd see that when people get upvoted for posting their images, that becomes part of their profile. So you get reputational capital, you become part of an attention economy that moves you higher up the ladder so that when you do want to be heard, you are more likely to be heard. So you're right, there's no money changing hands. But in fact, the people from North Queensland didn't get paid either because they didn't understand money, right? They were too primitive. So Cunningham would supposedly pay them and then keep their wages because they didn't understand money. Though, of course, they did understand money and they did want their money. So in either case, is it a transparent transaction? The people who perform in circuses were often not really paid. But there's certainly a resource extraction that's, as you say, of a different resource. So attention is the resource. So when people celebrate the attention economy, they often do it in a way that implies this is kinder and gentler than capitalism was, because attention is positive, and it's always got a valence, it's pro-social, right? Because who could say that's bad? But I would say attention to these things is absolutely bad. But that's what people, these are very images that people have paid a lot of attention to because they just are so weird. So being weird is another way to get into the attention economy. And the connection between shame and weirdness, I think, is a little easier to see. But yeah, that's great. I think the question of shame is really interesting in the social media age, and one that should be plumbed a little deeper, for sure.
I think we got one more question. Time for that?
That comment makes me think of our lives, in which he describes they're very different from what in the South it is different from. In the South, the Christian English he characterizes about the ascents of outrage. It becomes very melodramatic, they're very transgressive, sleeping with his sister. They enact shame and shock and outrage at all levels of corruption, not just the state, but one's family. So I can't help but think that there's something in the agency of the production of these images that should matter to themselves. And I don't know how you're going to get at it, but
Why do you think that it should matter? What is
I
it?
think the people who make this one, even if there's a script, are probably, they are themselves in the visual culture. They're a rich one, and these films are exported all over the world. And I think that they have some involvement that will go beyond what we can see. If you were embed them in the kind of visual economy and culture that I only know from reading drawing archives, but that might enrich and allow us to see what role they might be playing for recycling habits.
Yes, please do. Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things I'm teaching a seminar on the dark side of digital this semester, one of the things that we've emphasized repeatedly is methodology. And how do you think about digital? And so methodologically, I think this is a question that I think is worth pursuing. I think it would be a different kind of project. I mean, I think there's two projects. So one would involve this interaction of the sort of mutuality of agency, because I was thinking about the same question as well in regard to this. But another would involve reading these images in relation to shame images as they circulate on the internet generally, in which case perhaps it would be a different research project and a different sort of methodological approach. I don't know if that, if either, if you want to respond to if that is like an out in a way for why you might not have to deal with that, because perhaps you're doing a different, this is part of a different methodological project. I don't know.
Yeah, I was trained in the 90s, and I always want to look for agency and resistance. It was kind of the way we were brought up. We're supposed to find it. But I don't see it. I really wish I could, because then I could feel a little better about this, right? That people are claiming their own agency in the weapons of the weak. If this is a weapon of the weak, it's a really weak weapon, right? And so I'm not satisfied with that as a kind of reading of it. But I understand why you would ask that. because I've been asked at, other times I've given this paper, I mean, there's a real longing to see that some kind of power in, that people can retain in the face of humiliating circumstances.
Just to follow up on that, what happens afterwards? What happens after these images show up on the internet? Do you know if there have been any cases where the people depicted actually maybe launch legal suits or libel suits or anything like that?
No, I have not seen anything like that.
Because then it makes me think that there's some kind of weird code, like it's almost like an abusive relationship, right? It's like one person is demanding something from another, the other comes back and gets them to humiliate themselves, and then there's some kind of weird codependence involved in this. So you can analyze each side separately, of course, but then you can also analyze the total relationship, the back and forth that's going on, which seems very strange.
Yeah.
So I think we should give Lisa a little rest.